Howdy folks, Dave here at Thunder Mesa Studio, and I think it's high time we got back to work on Calico Mountain. Don't you? Now this is the area I'm going to be working on. Before I can do any more on Calico Creek, I really need to plan and build all of these bridges. And the first one I'm going to do is this trestle right here. Well, taking some quick measurements, I can see we're going to need a bridge that's 12 inches long or 48 feet in O-scale. Now what I have planned for this location is a pretty basic low-boy wooden trestle with wooden abutments at each end, retaining wall abutments, and 3 trestle bents, each spaced about 12 feet apart. Before starting construction, I distressed and stained most of the wood, using the good old India ink and alcohol mixture I've described in other videos. Now the first thing I want to do is make the bridge stringers. And I'm going to do that by making kind of a sandwich of these 3 6x12s. There'll be 2 of them, one under each rail, like that. So that's what we're going to start on. I prefer to use yellow carpenter's glue when working with wood, slightly diluted as needed and applied with a small soft brush. All right, let me show you what I've done here to make the construction of this bridge deck a little bit easier. I have built a jig, and this is out of some foam core, and I've got some grid paper that I've drawn some guidelines on here, and I've pasted it up to the foam core. And basically what I have is, the important thing with the stringers is that they be directly underneath the rails. So you have to measure the distance between the rails. So basically the middle of the stringer is under the rail on each side, it's the same gauge. Okay, so we've drawn a center line here and an outside line for where that string will line up. Put some double stick tape on there. And I've also marked where the bents are going to go. So when I want to put those vestibule ties, those longer ties, I'll know where to put them. And this back on here, this stop, shows me how far the ties go, right? So I'm going to tape down the stringers onto here with that double stick tape, and then I will glue the ties in place all the way down. And the tie spacing is easy. They are 8 inches apart. So you just take another tie and stick it in between the ones that you're gluing all the way down until you're done. Okay, now that this glue's had a chance to set up, I can just pop this off the jig and move on to the next step, which is these guardrails, these 6x6 timbers that go outside of the steel rails. And what we need to do is measure in, who stole my pencil? There it is. Measure in about a scale foot, actually exactly a scale foot, from the end of the ties here. So 1/4 inch on each side. And that will be our guide for gluing these into place. Well, moving right along here, our trestle deck is nearing completion. We've got the guard rails, the 6x6 guard timbers installed on here. But now for a more realistic look, I'm going to want to add some nut bolt washer castings. Pretty much every other tie all the way down, going through the 6x6 and into the tie. And I counted, and that's 18 per side, 36. So I need to drill 36 tiny little holes, little pilot holes, to put these NBWs into. And what I'm using is these are from Scale Model Masterpieces. Of course, you can use Grant Line or Tichy or any brand you prefer. So that's what I'm going to do next. But fortunately, through the magic of time lapse, you don't have to watch me do this. Watch me drill every single hole. By the time I'm done talking, in fact, it'll probably be done for you. So There it is. Okay, now we can put the NBWs in, and I've already pre-painted them on the sprues with some flat dark brown, kind of a rusty, dirty dark brown color. And for each and every one, we cut it off the sprue, take our tweezers, dip the end in some cyanoacrylate, and push it down into the hole. All right, I'll have to do that 35 more times. And I've painted more of them than I need because invariably one or two of them will go pew flying across the room. So let's get it done. Well, not bad. I only lost 2 spikes. The next thing I want to do before I get any further on this is make sure it fits in the spot it's supposed to go in. So let's go check that. Now, the more traditional way to do this would be to spike rails on this over at the workbench, but I've never been that traditional. So what I often do with my bridges is I install them in place. What I'm going to do is remove these plastic ties and then support the bridge deck from the bottom and spike the rails directly onto the new bridge ties. And I've done several trestles this way, and it works out, and it has the advantage of you being able to run trains on your layout long before the bridges are finished, which is something that comes in handy. Before I install this over on the layout, I want to build these little vestibule platforms over here at the workbench, and for that I'll be using some scale 1x12s for the planking, some 4x4s, and some O-scale 2x4 stock. I used 1x12s for the vestibule decking, then added the 4x4 upright posts and 2x4 bracing. Alright, well, I'll put the fire barrels in later, but I think this is ready to install on the layout. Now I've set the bridge in place here with a block of foam and some shims underneath to support it while I spike the rails to the ties. And what I'm using for that, of course, I've got some micro-engineering small spikes and my spiking pliers. These are the pliers with a little T-shaped groove in here so they hold the each spike right like that, so you can drive it in. And the other tools I'm using, very important, an NMRA standards gauge, so you can keep checking the gauge of the track to make sure that it's straight. Then I've got a nail set for the more stubborn spikes to push those home. And if I need to get any started, I've got my pin vise with a tiny little drill bit in there. So now I'm just going to go down. I'm going to spike 2 spikes for every rail, 1 on each side, all the way down. Oh, and my secret weapon, forgot to show you, is this block of 1/4-inch stock, which fits perfectly between the rails, and I just move it as I go and spike around it to keep the rails engaged. Okay, I think that'll do it. Very nice. Well, now I can get these blocks out of here and start thinking about building the trestle bents and the abutments on each side. Now the first thing I want to build is this right-hand side bridge abutment. And the lumber I'll be using for that is, these are some O-scale 10 by 10s. And this is 12 by 12 for the footer down here. And the 10 by 10s is for this top sill and for the upright bracing. And then for the cribbing that holds back the dirt behind it, I'll be using some good old coffee stir sticks, and these scale out to about 4 by 12. So that works perfectly. So I'm going to start by building this, and the first thing I need to do is cut this top sill to length. Okay, now I can flip this over and start adding the cribbing on the back side. All right, now I can glue this abutment in place. Had to carve away just a little bit of the scenery, not too much. Use some Eileen's tacky glue. Then I built the slightly shorter right-hand abutment in just the same way on the same template. Well, I'm just about ready to start building the trestle bents. This is a drawing I created and made a jig out of. If you've seen my other build videos like this, you've seen me build jigs like this before. It's basically just some blue grid paper, which I've drawn the plan on, laminated to some foam core, and then with some stops here for the different pieces to keep them in place while the glue dries. Also, I put packaging tape, clear packaging tape over the drawing so the glue on the bent pieces doesn't stick to the paper. This one I did a little bit differently, added a little extra wrinkle to it because the footer here is a 12 by 12. And so it needs to be centered on these 10 by 10 upright posts right in the middle. And that's close to a 32nd of an inch, a little bit less actually, but 32nd of an inch on each side. So I've cut the drawing in half and elevated the upper part of the drawing a 32nd of an inch higher, so it creates a slot. I just slot in the 12 by 12 down on the bottom like that, and then I can build the rest of the trestle bent right on top of it and have those 10 by 10 uprights centered on the 12 by 12. Might be more work that you want to go to do something like this. You might want to just wing it, but I find it really helps, and then you end up with all of your trestle bents being consistent. Speaking of consistency, another jig I've created is just this little miter box, which is some foam core stuck to some MDF, which matches the angle and length of the angled uprights, the angled 10 by 10s. So I can just drop a piece in there and cut it on each side, and it'll fit, and every piece will be the same size. So that's what I'm going to do now. I'm going to need to cut 6 of these and 6 of the straight uprights, and then I can start assembling my 3 trestle bents for the Calico Creek trestle. Slide that down in there. That's the 12 by 12 footer. Slide that into place. And I think we'll do the outer angled uprights first. Got a fresh blob of yellow glue here to work with. Nice fit there. Got the angle going the right way. Okay, now we do the 2 center uprights. That's pretty good. Now I can put this angled sway brace on. Got 2 of those, one for each side, 4x8s. My drawing shows me just where to put the dabs of glue so they won't show. Alright, just pop this out of here. There we go. And flip it over. Line it up with the drawing and then put in the other sway brace. All right, just need to build 2 more of those. All right, well, we've got our 3 trestle bents finished. It's just over there fitting them on the layout, make sure everything is in the right place. And now I'm going to add some NBWs, nut bolt washer castings. These are, I think, 1.5 inch hex bolts. Any big bolt will do. It'll look right. And I need, each one of these needs 20. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and then the other side coming through on each side. So, got a lot of little holes to drill. I'm going to use a, I think this is a 72 drill bit and get started. Okay, got the NBWs all in place, and now I want to touch up here and there where the stain missed, like where this is cut off and things like that. But rather than use the original alcohol and India ink stain, I'm going to use watercolors because I find them a little bit easier to control. And I'm going to mix up some burnt sienna and some cobalt blue, which makes a nice gray. And I can add more burnt sienna if I want it warmer. I can add more cobalt blue if I want it to be a cooler gray. And I'm just going to go in very carefully because you don't want to add a lot of water to this. Because A, you don't want the wood to warp, and B, of course, you don't want those glue joints to come undone. So I'm just going to go around and touch up here and there on these. Here's something else I'm going to do. I'm going to take the same mixture and I'm going to add some weathering. This is one of my favorite tricks, weathering with watercolors, and it works great on wooden models like this. Just take and go like that. You add some variation. Put a little bit up here, right on this seam. And this is what I'm simulating here is basically water stains, where the water has run down here and stained the wood and aged it a little bit. Just like that. And then you can just take your thumb or take a little bit more water and blend it in. Just like that. And you get a real nice kind of rustic look. Speaking of rustic, I'm going to add some rust now. And that's going to be pure burnt sienna. I'm going to go here where these NBWs are and just put a little streak down like that. See that? Do a little bit for each one. Now again, if it gets too intense, you just take a little bit of water and you can fade that right out, blend it. There we go. Much more weathered and realistic look here. Alright, and with that, these trestle bents are now finished. But I can't just go install them under the bridge because, well, these uprights go down into water. This footer would be sitting in the water, and most of you know wood and water is a bad combination structurally, so what's a railroad to do? Well, there's got to be some sort of footing underneath it, either concrete or stone, and in Thunder Mesa we like to use stone footings, and I like to carve them out of balsa foam. So I've cut 3 pieces that will fit in the various locations. This is like a half piece because part of it's up on the rock actually, so that'll blend in with the rock. And I'm going to carve some stone footings that these trestle bents will then sit on top of. And the creek will be down here, the water level will be down below. And to carve this, I've just put a small nail into this pin vise, and I'm going to use that to carve the stones. The trick to carving stonework like this is to, you got to be able to think 3-dimensionally. You got to think of them as stones. Don't think of these as lines. You are actually just defining the edges of the stones here. And since this is a random stone footing made from local materials, I can get a little creative and have different shapes and sizes of the rocks. All right, got the carving done on my footings. Get a coat of primer on there, and then we can finish these up and install them on the layout. Well, now I have a coat of dark brown primer basically on my foundation stones, and the next step I like to do for stonework like this is take some good old spackle from the hardware store and use my finger and rub it and push it right back into the cracks to represent mortar between the stones. And I'll do this on all sides. And then you take a damp cloth. I like to use this is a piece of old t-shirt, and kind of wipe it off like that. So it's mostly just down in the cracks and crevices. And this is what it looks like after it dries. As you can see, it dries very white. I'll show you how I tone this down a little bit with this India ink and alcohol stain. Same one I use for the wood. Just put it on real quick. Not too heavy. Now I just want to take a paper towel and dab most of that off, so that kind of grays it down a little bit. Now the idea here is that these footings would be made of the same local rock that you find around in the area. So I'm going to use the same colors I use on the scenery. This is some raw sienna. That's the base scenery color for all the scenery on the Thunder Mesa layout. And I'm going to dry brush it on, trying just to hit the tops of the stones and not the mortar I just put in there. See how that's starting to look more like the native stone around Thunder Mesa. After the dry brushing, you take a soft brush and use the paint pretty much full strength rather than dry brushing, and pick out some individual stones. Do like this one right here. So you start to get that variation. Then you want to start adding some different colors. I have a couple of bottles of inexpensive craft acrylics here. Take a little burnt umber, a little brown oxide. There you go, you get the idea. Just give those stones a little bit of variation. Shapes and textures and colors. I've already measured and marked here where each of these footings is going to go. So now all I have to do is glue them in place with a little bit of Eileen's. Alright, now I can put the trestle bents in. If I did this right, it should be a nice snug fit with these bents, and I don't need very much glue to hold them in place. For the fire barrels, I have a couple of nice looking white metal castings from Keith Weissman, and I think I'll get some paint on these, and while I wait for that paint to dry, I'll come and start doing some of the ground cover here to blend this bridge in. I dry brushed the Pico ties with some tan and gray craft acrylics to make them better match the weathered wood of the trestle. Then I spread my standard chick grit ballast on the approach tracks, using a soft brush to keep the turnout points and rail flanges clear. This was cemented in place with white glue, diluted 3:1 with water, and applied with a spray bottle. Then it was time to add real rocks, sand, and dirt to blend in the road bed, bridge abutments, and trestle footings down in the creek bed. While I let this mess dry, I'm going to add another little bit of detail. You see I've already started to add these braces in between the bents, and I think they look cool. And they differentiate this trestle from other trestles on the layout and, you know, give it a little bit more of a rustic look. So I'm all in on them. And these are just some 4x8s, some scale 4x8s that I've stained up and already added the nut bolt washer castings over at the workbench. Makes things a little bit easier. Okay, I think I'm going to let all that dry overnight, and then I'll come back tomorrow and see how it looks. Well, it's the very next day. Everything's nice and dry. So now I'm just going to take a good old Bright Boy and clean all the glue off the top of the rails. Well, I have to say I'm pretty happy with the way this project turned out. Got my trestle done and made a good start in the creek bed too. Now, if you've never built a wooden trestle yourself, I encourage you to give it a try. They're not hard to do, just a little time consuming. Which reminds me, I've got several more to do here before I can get this creek finished. But that's going to do it for this time. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. Adios for now.